The rejected Omega made the Alpha King's silent child speak. He saw everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Lira, an Omega who had been rejected by her own pack, had never felt more alone. From a young age, she had always known she was different. While other Omegas in her pack were revered for their healing abilities or submission to the Alphas, Lira had none of these traits. Her strength was fragile, her presence unnoticed. She had long ago given up on the idea of ever being chosen by a mate. The whispers of her uselessness followed her wherever she went, her packmate's mockery, her constant companion. Life as an Omega in her pack was a cruel joke. Lira spent most of her days in the outskirts of the village, doing the tasks no one else wanted, all while the other Omegas lived their lives in the safety of the pack's warmth. It was no surprise when she was left behind at the yearly mating ceremony, watching as her packmates were chosen by Alphas, while she remained invisible. But something changed that day. While wandering through the woods in despair, she stumbled upon a small, abandoned child, lying helpless in the brush. His small body was covered in scratches, his face pale and silent. Without thinking, Lira knelt beside him, brushing his hair away from his face. His eyes opened, revealing a pair of silver irises that shimmered with an intelligence beyond his years. As Lira cradled him in her arms, she couldn't help but wonder who he was and why he was alone. She made her way back to her cottage, the child resting against her chest, his breathing shallow but steady. She didn't know who this child was, or why he was so special, but something in her heart told her that his arrival had a purpose. Over the next few days, Lira tended to him, feeding him what little she had, and helping him regain his strength. To her surprise, he never spoke a word. But there was something in the way he watched her, his eyes full of unspoken thoughts. Lira knew deep down that this child was different. As the days passed, she began to notice strange things happening. The air around them seemed to shimmer when he was near, and her own emotions would fluctuate without explanation. It was as though his presence was awakening something deep within her, something she couldn't understand. Then, one fateful evening, as the moonlight filtered through the trees, the child spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it echoed in Lira's heart. "Mother," he said. The word hit her like a thunderclap, and for a moment, she felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. But that wasn't the only shock that awaited her. The child was not just any ordinary boy. He was Prince Kellen, the silent heir to the Alpha King's throne. No one in the village had known the truth, not even Lira. But the moment he spoke, she felt it. The undeniable bond, the connection that would change everything. What she didn't know was that Alpha King, his father, had been watching from the shadows, seeing everything unfold. His son had never spoken before, and yet, here he was, speaking to Lira. The king had heard the rumors, but seeing the miracle unfold before his eyes made him realize the impossible. Lira wasn't just any Omega. She was his son's fate. And as much as she had been rejected by her own pack, the Alpha King was about to claim her as his own, for she was the one who could heal what had been broken. The true test of fate had just begun. As the days passed, Lira could feel the strange, undeniable pull between her and Prince Kellen growing stronger. The bond was unspoken but ever-present. The child, who had once been mute and fragile, now gazed at her with eyes that seemed to see straight through her. There were moments when she thought he knew more than he let on, as if he understood her pain, her loneliness, and her deepest fears. But no matter how many times she searched his face, he would never speak again, not unless he felt ready. For the first time in Lira's life, she didn't feel so alone. She had found someone who needed her, and in return, she found herself in the process of healing. She wasn't just an Omega. She was someone important. Prince Kellen's silent gaze followed her wherever she went, his presence always near. It was almost as if he had become her shadow. His absence was felt when he wasn't in the same room, and when he was close, it was as though the air itself became charged with a strange energy. Lira wasn't sure if it was just her imagination or if something much larger was at play. One evening, As the moonlight bathed the forest in silver, Lira sat on the edge of the porch, looking out into the darkness. The air was cool and crisp, and the sounds of the forest seemed amplified in the silence of the night. Kellen was sitting beside her, his small frame curled up next to her. She could feel the quiet energy between them, something that had been building up for days. He was staring at the sky, his silvery eyes reflecting the moon. "Kellen," Lira whispered, breaking the silence. "What's your story? Why did you come to me?" For a moment, the child didn't respond. Then, as if considering her question carefully, he finally spoke, but his words weren't what she expected. "You're the one who will save me." The words struck Lira with an unexpected force. Her breath caught in her throat, and she turned to look at him, her heart racing. Kellen's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, a depth of understanding, of knowledge that went beyond what a child should know. Before Lira could respond, there was a rustling in the trees. A shadow moved across the clearing, and Lira felt her heart skip a beat. She knew it wasn't just the wind. Someone was out there, watching them. And that's when it happened. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and imposing, his eyes gleaming with an authority that made the air feel heavy. It was him, Alpha King, the man who had ruled the northern territories with an iron fist, the man who had never shown mercy. Lira froze, her body tense as the Alpha King stepped closer. His presence was overwhelming, and his gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She had only heard stories of him, stories of his ruthless nature, his cold heart. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. "Lira," his voice was low and commanding, yet there was something different about the way he said her name. As though it carried weight, as though it meant something deeper. She stood, suddenly feeling small in his presence, her heart pounding in her chest. "You've been taking care of my son," Alpha King said, his voice never wavering. "I've been watching." Lyra's eyes widened in shock. "You've been watching?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you come sooner?" The Alpha King's gaze softened just a fraction. "Because I had to be sure. I had to see if you were the one who could heal him. And now I know." He paused for a moment, his eyes flicking to Kellen, who had yet to say a word, still sitting in Lyra's lap. "Kellen has never spoken before. He hasn't said a word since the curse was placed upon him. But when he spoke to you, I knew. He recognized you." Lira looked down at Kellen, his tiny hand gripping hers tightly. He had recognized her? But how? Was this some kind of fate? Alpha King continued, his voice filled with both admiration and a hint of something else, something deeper. "You are the mate the moon goddess has chosen for me. You are the one who will break the curse." Lyra's mind raced. The mate of Alpha King? How could this be true? She was nothing. A discarded Omega. The thought of being with someone like him, someone so powerful, was impossible. But as she looked into his eyes, something inside her stirred. The truth was undeniable. She could feel the connection. She could feel the pull. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She was not just the one to heal Kellen. She was the one who could heal the Alpha King, too. The curse that had bound him, the curse that had made him a tyrant in the eyes of the world, was finally starting to unravel. And Lira, the rejected Omega, was the key to it all. The Alpha King's words echoed in Lyra's mind, each syllable heavy with meaning. "You are the mate the moon goddess has chosen for me," he had said, and she could still feel the weight of those words pressing down on her chest. Lira had always been told she was nothing, an Omega with no power, no future. Yet here she was, standing before the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the Northern Territories, being told she was his chosen mate. The idea seemed impossible, yet the bond between them felt undeniable. As she stood there, trying to process the enormity of what had just been revealed, Kellen's hand tightened around hers, as though he was silently reminding her of the connection they shared. The Alpha King's gaze softened as he watched the silent exchange between Lira and his son, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something Lira couldn't quite place. "I know this is overwhelming," the Alpha King said, his voice low and steady. "But there is no mistake. The curse that has bound me. It is something that only you can break." Lyra's heart raced as she tried to understand what he was saying. The curse? The Alpha King had been cursed? He had never spoken of it before, but now that she was this close to him, She could feel the darkness that seemed to hang over him, a weight that he had carried for far too long. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. The Alpha King stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. But there was something comforting in the way he stood beside her, as though he was no longer the cold, untouchable ruler she had heard about in stories. "My father, before me, ruled with cruelty," he said, his tone darkening. "He used dark magic to maintain his reign, and it was that same magic that cursed me. I cannot shift fully, and my wolf is locked away, forever in a state of rage and madness. But you, Lira, you are the one who can release me from this torment." Lyra's mind swirled with confusion. She had never been a healer, never done anything extraordinary in her life. How could she, a rejected Omega, be the one to heal a powerful Alpha King? But as she looked into his eyes, she felt something stir deep inside her. There was a spark of recognition, something ancient and powerful. The Alpha King continued, his voice low and filled with resolve. "The moment you saved my son, the bond between us was formed. You were the key all along, the one who would heal both of us. I knew when Kellen spoke to you. I knew that you were the one destined to break the curse." Lyra's head spun. The curse that had bound him, the darkness that had consumed him. Could it really be true? She was the one who could set him free? But what did it mean for her? What did it mean for them? "But I am nothing," Lira whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm just an Omega. I have no power." The Alpha King reached out, gently lifting her chin so that she met his gaze. His touch was warm, and for the first time, she felt something like hope flicker inside her. "You are everything," he said softly. "You are the mate I have searched for, the one who will bring light to the darkness that has haunted me for so long. The moon goddess has chosen you, and together, we will overcome this curse." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process his words. Was this really happening? Could she really be the one to save him? The room seemed to close in around her, and for a moment, everything felt unreal. But as she looked at Kellen, his silent gaze still locked onto hers, she knew she couldn't turn away. This was her destiny. They were connected, and whatever the future held, she would face it with him. The Alpha King took a step back, his posture commanding yet filled with a new sense of vulnerability. "There is much we must do, Lira," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "The curse cannot be broken easily. But I believe in you, and I believe in us." Lira took a deep breath, her mind still racing, but now, there was a new determination within her. She had never asked for this, never wanted to be chosen for something so great. But the pull between her and the Alpha King was undeniable, and as she stood there, she realized that this was no longer about her. It was about breaking the curse, saving the man who had been consumed by darkness, and giving Kellen the chance to live without the shadows that had followed him for so long. The path ahead would not be easy, but Lira knew one thing for certain: she was no longer alone. She had a purpose, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, for herself, for Kellen, and for the Alpha King. The days following the revelation felt like a blur for Lira. Everything had changed so quickly. One moment, she was just a discarded Omega, living in the shadows of the pack, and the next, she was thrust into a world of power, destiny, and unimaginable responsibility. The Alpha King, once the embodiment of strength and fear, now stood beside her, vulnerable in a way she had never expected. They had spoken of breaking the curse, of healing the wounds that bound him, but the journey ahead felt overwhelming. They couldn't just face the curse, they had to uncover its origins, and Lira realized that her role in all of this was far greater than she had ever imagined. She had to be the key, not just to healing Kellen, but to restoring the Alpha King's power, his heart, and the future of their entire world. The Alpha King's voice broke through her thoughts. "We begin tomorrow," he said, his voice firm but gentle, filled with determination. "There is a place, deep in the northern mountains, where the curse first took root. It is there we must go to begin the process of breaking it. The journey will not be easy, it will test both of us. But I know you are ready, Lira." His words, though heavy with gravity, stirred something deep inside her. She had always doubted herself, always felt less than the others in her pack, but here, now, in the presence of the Alpha King, she felt a strange sense of purpose awakening within her. "We will leave at first light," The Alpha King continued. Prepare yourself. This journey is not just about breaking the curse. It is about finding what truly connects us, what makes us who we are, and why you, of all people, are the one destined to stand by my side. Lira nodded, though her heart raced with uncertainty. She had no idea what awaited them on this journey, but the trust the Alpha King had placed in her was something she could not ignore. He was no longer just the ruler of the Northern Territories. He was a man haunted by his past, desperate for redemption, and Lira had become the one to offer him that chance. As night fell, Lira spent the hours preparing for the journey. She gathered what little she had: warm clothing, a few supplies, and a small vial of healing herbs. Her fingers trembled as she packed, the weight of what was to come pressing heavily on her mind. The path they would take was treacherous, filled with dangers both known and unknown, but the thought of standing by the Alpha King, facing whatever awaited them, gave her the strength to carry on. When morning finally arrived, Lira stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart heavy with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The Alpha King was already there, his presence commanding as always, his dark eyes focused on the path ahead. Kellen was beside him, looking up at her with a silent, knowing gaze. She offered him a reassuring smile before turning her attention to the Alpha King. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The Alpha King nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile, though it was laced with the weight of the journey ahead. "Then let us begin." Together, they set off, the early morning light casting long shadows across the forest floor. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks shrouded in mist, as if guarding the secrets of the curse. The journey was long and arduous, and the deeper they ventured into the mountains, the more Lira could feel the oppressive weight of the curse. It was as if the land itself was tainted, the air thick with the remnants of dark magic. There were moments when she felt a coldness settle over her, a chill that seemed to creep into her bones, but each time, the Alpha King was there, his presence a warm shield against the darkness. Days passed, and the trio faced countless obstacles: treacherous cliffs, dense forests filled with unseen dangers, and wild beasts that seemed drawn to their path. But with each challenge, Lira found herself growing stronger, more attuned to the magic around her. She had never believed in magic, but now, with each step, she felt the ancient power that coursed through the land, pulling her closer to her destiny. By the time they reached the base of the mountain where the curse had first been cast, Lira was no longer the same woman who had walked into the forest days before. She was stronger, more confident, and though the fear still lingered, it no longer controlled her. The Alpha King turned to her as they stood before the mountain, the final barrier between them and the end of the curse. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "We must enter the cave and confront the source of the curse. Are you ready, Lira?" Lira met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm ready," she replied, though she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the Alpha King by her side, and together, they would break the curse and rebuild their world. The cave before them loomed like a dark mouth, threatening to swallow them whole. Lira could feel the weight of the cursed land pressing down on her, the air thick with ancient magic, as if the very earth beneath her feet had absorbed centuries of sorrow and rage. The Alpha King stood tall beside her, his presence unwavering, though she could see the faintest hint of uncertainty in his eyes. This was the final step, the one that would either break the curse or consume them both. He turned to her, his expression serious, but there was something in his gaze that reassured her. "This is it," he said, his voice low, filled with resolve. "The curse is bound to this place, to the shadows that live within it. Once we step inside, there is no turning back." Lira nodded, her heart racing. She had never imagined that her life would come to this moment, standing at the threshold of something so powerful, so dangerous. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The journey to this cave had changed her, and with every step she took beside the Alpha King, she could feel the bond between them growing stronger. She had become more than just an Omega. She had become a part of something much bigger, a part of this curse, and perhaps its undoing. "I'm ready," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The Alpha King gave her a tight, reassuring smile before turning toward the cave. The entrance was dark, the stone walls jagged and sharp, but it seemed to beckon them forward. "Stay close," he ordered, and with that, they entered. As they ventured deeper into the cave, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to shift around them, almost alive. The Alpha King's eyes glowed faintly, a testament to his hidden power, but the deeper they went, the more Lira could feel the darkness trying to close in on them. Every step was heavier than the last, the weight of the curse pressing down on them like an invisible force. "It's here," the Alpha King said suddenly, his voice a sharp whisper, as though even the walls of the cave were listening. They had reached the heart of the cave, where the magic was thickest, where the curse had taken root. In front of them stood a massive stone altar, its surface etched with symbols Lira couldn't understand. But the power that radiated from it was undeniable. It was the source, the curse, the magic that had bound the Alpha King's wolf and shattered his soul. The Alpha King stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the altar. "This is where it all began," he said, his voice quiet but filled with deep sorrow. "My father had the curse placed upon me here. I've spent years searching for a way to break it, but nothing worked. Until you came." Lira looked at him, her heart heavy with sympathy and understanding. She had never known the pain he had suffered, the isolation, the burden of a curse that had turned him into a prisoner of his own power. But now, here, in this cave, she understood. She understood the depth of his torment. "We can break it," Lira said, her voice steady. Together, the Alpha King turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You truly believe that?" he asked, his voice soft, vulnerable in a way she had never heard from him before. Lira nodded, stepping closer to him. She could feel the magic swirling around them, the raw power of the curse, but there was something else too. A flicker of hope. The Alpha King's eyes softened as he reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then let's end this," he said, and together, they approached the altar. The moment their hands touched the stone, the cave seemed to shudder, as though the earth itself was awakening. A low growl, deep and primal, rumbled through the air, and for a brief moment, Lira felt the Alpha King's wolf stir within him, a wild force struggling to break free. The air crackled with magic, and the shadows around them seemed to writhe and twist, as if fighting against the bond they were forming. But Lira held on, steady and resolute. She could feel the pulse of the magic inside her, something she had never known existed, but it was there, powerful and alive. She focused on it, drawing it toward the Alpha King. "We can do this," she whispered, and with that, she poured every ounce of her strength into the bond, into the curse that had trapped them both. The altar lit up with a blinding light, and the magic surged, crashing against them with a force so strong, it felt like the entire cave was collapsing. For a moment, Lira thought they wouldn't make it, that the curse was too powerful to break. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the pressure released. The cave went silent. Still, the Alpha King stood beside her, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths, his eyes closed, as if listening for something. Slowly, he opened his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lira saw the relief in them. The curse was gone. The bond between them, the one that had once been tied to darkness, was now pure. She had done it. They had done it. The Alpha King's wolf was no longer trapped. He was free, and with that freedom, Lira knew that their journey had just begun. Together, they had shattered the chains that had bound them both, and in the process, had forged a new future, one full of hope, strength, and a bond that could never be broken. The cave was silent, the oppressive darkness lifting as the last remnants of the curse vanished into the air like smoke. The stone altar, once pulsing with dark energy, now lay still, its power neutralized. Lira stood there, her hand still in the Alpha King's, feeling a warmth that hadn't been there before. The connection between them was stronger than ever, no longer tainted by the shadows of the curse, but filled with the pure light of their bond. She looked up at the Alpha King, her heart pounding in her chest. The change in him was unmistakable. The darkness that had once surrounded him, that had made him so cold and distant, was gone, replaced by something new: hope, freedom. "It's over," the Alpha King said, his voice hoarse but full of emotion. His eyes locked with hers, a mixture of gratitude and awe in his gaze. "You did it, Lira. You freed me. You freed us both." Lira couldn't help but smile, though her body was still trembling from the intensity of the moment. "We did it," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She had known, deep down, that this was where their journey would lead, but standing here, in this cave that had held so much pain and suffering, it was hard to believe that it was really over. She wasn't sure what the future held for them, but one thing was certain. Their bond was unbreakable. The Alpha King pulled her closer, his hand resting gently on the back of her head. "I will never be the same again," he said softly. "You've changed everything. You've healed me, Lira." Lira looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She could see the man behind the king now, the man who had been hidden for so long by the weight of the curse. He was no longer just a ruler. He was her mate, her equal, and together, they had overcome the darkness. "And you've healed me," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. The Alpha King smiled, a true, unguarded smile, and for the first time, Lira saw the man who had once been consumed by his own power, now free from that burden. "We will face the future together," he said, his voice filled with a promise. "No more darkness, no more fear, only us." As the words left his mouth, Lira felt a shift deep within her, as though the very air around them had changed. The cave, which had once been filled with the echoes of the curse, now felt like a place of rebirth. It was as though the world itself had been given a second chance, just as they had. Slowly, the Alpha King took a step back, his eyes still locked on hers. "There's much to do," he said, his tone more serious now, but there was a fire in his eyes that had not been there before. "The pack needs us. They need to know the truth about what happened, about the curse and how it was broken. We cannot hide this. We must lead them together." Lira nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. She had never wanted power, never wanted to be in the spotlight, but now, she realized, it wasn't about power. It was about rebuilding, about helping the pack and the world heal from the scars that had been left by the curse. "We will lead them," she said, her voice strong and certain. The Alpha King's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand once more. "Together," he confirmed. Together, they walked out of the cave, their steps firm and steady. As they emerged into the daylight, the world seemed brighter, more alive. The mountains, which had once seemed like an insurmountable barrier, now stood as a symbol of their victory. The sun shone down on them, warming their faces, and Lira felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Lira felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer the rejected Omega, the one who had been cast aside. She was a force in her own right, a mate to the Alpha King, and together, they would rebuild the future of their pack. And as they walked side by side, Lira knew that the darkness was behind them, and the light of their future stretched out before them, endless and bright. As Lira and the Alpha King walked back towards the pack's territory, the weight of their shared mission became clearer. They had just shattered a curse that had bound the Alpha King's soul for years, but their journey was far from over. The pack, the people who had once rejected Lira, needed to be led, and the truth had to be told. They couldn't afford to hide anymore. This was their new reality, one forged by the strength of their bond. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the land as they approached the pack's borders. Lira could feel the unease in the air, the whispers already beginning. The pack had sensed the Alpha King's return, but they didn't know the truth of what had transpired. They didn't know how everything had changed. Lira could feel the eyes on her as they entered the heart of the pack, but this time, there was no fear, no shame in her steps. She was not the broken Omega she once was. She was the Alpha King's mate, and she had a purpose now. As they reached the center of the pack's territory, the Alpha King halted. His expression was serious, his eyes scanning the gathered wolves, some of whom had already begun to kneel in reverence. Lira could see the uncertainty in their faces, the hesitance. They didn't know what to make of the changes. The Alpha King raised his hand, and the pack fell silent, awaiting his command. "Listen to me, all of you." His voice rang out, deep and commanding, but with a warmth Lira had never heard before. "What you thought you knew about me, about this pack, has changed. The curse that bound me is no more. I am free, and we are free." Lira stepped forward, her heart pounding as she felt the eyes of the pack on her. The one who broke that curse, the Alpha King continued, his gaze shifting to her, is the one standing beside me now. Lira. The pack shifted uncomfortably, some looking at Lira with disbelief, others with curiosity. The whispers began again, but this time, Lira stood tall. I was once an Omega, cast aside and forgotten, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves running through her. But today, I stand beside the Alpha King not as a servant, not as a rejected mate, but as his equal. The Alpha King stepped forward, his presence commanding as always, but there was something different in his stance, something softer, as if he was sharing this burden with her. Together, he said, his voice low and filled with emotion, we will lead this pack, rebuild what was broken, and guide you all into a new era. No longer will any wolf be cast aside. No more pain. No more fear. The pack watched in stunned silence, but Lira could feel the shift. Slowly, one by one, the wolves began to kneel, not in submission, but in respect. They were accepting her. The future they had feared was now upon them, and they were ready to embrace it. Lira turned to the Alpha King, her heart swelling with pride. He had always been their leader, but now, they were true partners. They were no longer bound by darkness. They were free, but their work wasn't done. We will need to make changes, Lira said, her voice strong. We will rebuild this pack, not with fear, but with unity. Every wolf deserves a place. No one should feel abandoned or worthless. The Alpha King nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. We will do this together, Lira. You and me. For the pack. For our future. The pack began to stir, a murmur of agreement running through them. It was clear now. The curse had not only been broken, but a new beginning had begun. Lira had never imagined herself standing here, in the heart of the pack, speaking as an equal to the Alpha King, but as the days passed, she could feel the changes sweeping through the wolves around her. They no longer looked at her with disdain, but with respect. She was no longer just a symbol of weakness. She was a symbol of strength. And as the sun set, casting its final rays over the land, Lira knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. Together, they would rebuild a future, one that was brighter, stronger, and filled with hope. And as she stood beside the Alpha King, their hands intertwined, Lira finally understood what it meant to be truly free. The darkness was behind them, and together, they would lead their pack into a future of unity, strength, and love. The days following the Alpha King's speech were filled with change, not just for the pack, but for Lira and the Alpha King as well. The pack was beginning to accept their new reality, but the road ahead was still uncertain. While the wolves had knelt in respect, some still carried doubts, whispers that echoed in the shadows. Lira could sense the eyes upon her, the cautious glances, the hesitation to fully embrace her as the Alpha King's mate. It was only natural, she knew. Trust would take time. But as she walked beside the Alpha King, her confidence grew. Together, they were rebuilding their pack, their future. It was early morning when the Alpha King called for a meeting with his inner council. Lira stood at his side, her hand resting in his, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. This was her place now, not behind the scenes, but standing by him, a true partner. The council chamber was large, filled with the most powerful wolves in the pack. They were an intimidating presence, their gazes sharp as they turned to watch Lira enter the room. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she held her head high, her posture strong. The Alpha King spoke first, his voice deep and commanding, filling the room. We have much to discuss, he said, his eyes sweeping over the council members. The curse is broken, and we have a new path to follow. Lira and I will lead this pack together, and we need your support to do so. Lira stepped forward, her voice steady but carrying the strength she had found within herself. I know there are doubts, she said, her eyes meeting those of the council members. I was once cast aside, but I am here now, not as an outsider, but as your future Luna. I am here to help rebuild, to unite our pack, and to bring about a new era. The room was silent for a moment, the wolves' eyes studying her, but she didn't flinch. She stood firm, her hand still in the Alpha King's, knowing that together they could face whatever came next. Finally, one of the elders spoke up, his voice gruff but respectful. You speak with conviction, Lira, but there are still many who question your place here. There are wolves who see you as nothing more than a discarded omega. It will take time to change their minds. Lira nodded, understanding the weight of the elder's words. I know, she replied, but I believe in us. I believe in the Alpha King, and I believe in this pack. We can change. We can grow stronger. Another wolf, younger but no less powerful, stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and wariness. If you truly wish to lead this pack, Lira, he said, his tone testing, then prove it. Prove that you can command the respect of those who have never seen you as anything more than an omega. Let us. The challenge was clear, and for a moment, the room fell into a tense silence. Lira felt the pressure mounting, but she refused to back down. She knew this moment was coming. She knew she had to prove herself, not just to the pack, but to herself. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking with the younger wolf's. I will lead, she said, her voice unwavering. I will prove that I am not just the Alpha King's mate. I will prove that I am strong, that I can stand beside him and lead this pack with honor and courage. The room remained silent, but she could feel the weight of their gazes shifting, as if they were beginning to see her in a new light. She had done it. She had faced the challenge, and she had not backed down. The Alpha King's grip on her hand tightened slightly, a silent show of support, and she felt the bond between them grow even stronger. As the meeting continued, Lira could feel the shift in the room. The council members spoke more openly, their voices no longer laced with doubt, but with respect. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead would be long, but Lira knew one thing for sure. They were on the right path. The pack would follow them, and together, they would create a future built on unity, strength, and love. Later that evening, as they stood outside under the starlit sky, the Alpha King turned to her, his eyes filled with pride. You did well today, he said, his voice soft but full of admiration. Lira smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. We did it together, she replied. The Alpha King stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her face. I couldn't have done it without you, Lira. You are my mate, my Luna, and together, we will lead this pack into a new future. Lyra's heart soared as she looked up at him, the man who had once been consumed by darkness, now standing beside her, ready to build something beautiful. Together, she whispered, and in that moment, she knew that no matter what challenges they faced, they would always face them side by side, united in love and purpose. The future was theirs to shape, and nothing could break the bond they had forged. As the days passed, Lira and the Alpha King continued to rebuild their pack, slowly but surely. The pack that had once rejected her now looked to her for leadership. Every decision she made, every action she took, was a testament to the transformation she had undergone. No longer was she the discarded Omega, the one who had been cast aside. Now, she was the Luna, the Alpha King's equal, standing side by side with him as they worked together to bring their people into a new era of strength, unity, and peace. The pack's transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. Wolves who had once doubted Lira now sought her counsel, coming to her with respect. Even the most powerful members of the council, who had initially questioned her place, began to see her as an undeniable force. The Alpha King often stood beside her in meetings, offering his unwavering support, but it was clear that it was Lira who had become the heart of their pack. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the Alpha King turned to her, a rare smile playing at the corners of his lips. You've done it, Lira, he said softly, his voice full of pride. You've made this pack your own. Lira looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined this life, never dreamed that she would be standing here, so strong and so loved. We've done it together, she replied, reaching for his hand, feeling the steady rhythm of his pulse. Without you, none of this would have been possible. The Alpha King smiled, his hand resting on hers, and for a moment, the weight of their shared journey felt lighter. They had faced the darkest of times together, and now, they were building something bright and beautiful. Their future was no longer uncertain. It was full of promise. There's still much work to be done, he said, his voice growing serious once again. The rest of the world still sees us as a force to be reckoned with. But we have to ensure that our pack stands not just as the strongest, but as the most united, the most compassionate. Lira nodded, her gaze steady. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would always be challenges, always forces that sought to tear them down. But she had learned something through all of this. She had learned the power of unity, of standing together, of building something that could never be broken. "We will lead with strength and compassion," she said, her voice firm. "We will show the world that we are not just a pack to fear, but a pack to respect. Together, we will build a legacy that will last for generations." The Alpha King's eyes softened as he looked at her, his heart swelling with love. "I know we will," he said, his voice full of unwavering confidence. "You are my mate, Lira. Together, we will shape the future." As the months passed, the changes they had begun took root, and the pack flourished. The bonds between them all grew stronger, and Lira found herself not just leading, but inspiring others to do the same. She had become the true heart of the pack, and the Alpha King, her partner, had become a leader unlike any before him. The world beyond their territory began to take notice of the changes in the northern territories. Where once there had been fear and uncertainty, there was now respect, admiration, and even hope. Other packs looked to them for guidance, seeing the strength of their unity and the power of their love. And as they stood together, watching the sunset one evening, the Alpha King's hand in hers, Lira knew that their journey had only just begun. The path ahead was long, but with each step, they would face it together. The future they had fought for, the future they had built, was theirs to shape. And nothing at all, could tear them apart. The darkness was behind them, and in its place, there was only light. Their love, their strength, and their unity would guide them forward, and together, they would lead the pack into a new age, an age of hope, an age of peace. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, Lira leaned into the Alpha King, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it side by side, forever united in heart and soul.